Chinese President Xi Jinping is on a historic visit to Saudi Arabia. We will take a look at China-Middle East relations. Hello, I'm Anand Naidu and this is The Heat. Saudi Arabia has pulled out all the stops to welcome Chinese President Xi Jinping. China is Saudi Arabia's main trading partner and the two countries are strengthening ties. This week, President Xi met with King Salman bin Abdulaziz Al Saud at Riyadh's royal palace. Elaine Reyes reports.
President Xi Jinping said that he was glad to visit Saudi Arabia again after 6 years and could still recall vividly his last visit. President Xi Jinping says China sees Saudi Arabia as an important force in the multipolar world and attaches great importance to developing the comprehensive strategic partnership with Saudi Arabia. King Salman extended his warm welcome to President Xi Jinping for visiting Saudi Arabia again. He says China and Saudi Arabia made excellent progress in creating synergy between strategies and conducting bilateral cooperation in various fields. King Salman noted that he highly values relations with China and is ready to work with President Xi Jinping to advance Saudi Arabia's comprehensive strategic partnership with China and deliver more benefits to both peoples sharing friendly relations. This is also conducive to regional and global peace, stability, and tranquility. The two heads of state co-signed the Comprehensive Strategic Partnership Agreement and agreed to take turns to host biennial meetings between the heads of state of the two countries.
To talk more about China-Middle East relations, let's bring in our panel. From Beijing, Zoon Ahmed Khan is a research fellow at the Center for China and Globalization. In Hangzhou, Victor Gao is a chair professor at Soochow University. From London, Abdel Atwan is editor-in-chief of Rai al-Yum and Arab News and Opinion website. And from Granville, Ohio, Fadhel Kaboub is an associate professor of economics at Denison University. Welcome to all of you. Victor Gao, this is President Xi Jinping's third trip since the pandemic, this time to Saudi Arabia. What is the significance of this trip and what does it tell us about China's expanding relationship with the Middle East?
Thank you very much for having me. President Xi Jinping's visit to Saudi Arabia as we speak, and also his attendance at the China Gulf State Summit, China Arabic Countries Summit, are truly groundbreaking diplomatic landmarks, because this really elevates China-Saudi relations, China-Gulf State relations, and China-Arab relations in general to the highest level ever in history. And this also heralds well for the future development of cooperation based on equality, mutual respect, and promoting peace and stability to a new height. And China now is the largest manufacturing country in the world and has the longest and the most comprehensive manufacturing lineup. In that sense, China is well positioned to cooperate not only with Saudi Arabia, which is the most important Arabic country, of course, but also with the 6 Gulf states and all the Arabic countries in the most comprehensive spectrum of cooperation, not only in energy, but in manufacturing, in electronics, for example, in services, medicine, all kinds of applications, roads, highways, connectivity of all kinds, and also, very importantly, in terms of defense. So this visit and the summit meetings that's being folding out are really the cementing blocks which will strengthen cooperations between China and all these countries for the coming decades. And this is truly unprecedented. We are very grateful to the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia for going to the full hilt in rolling out the red carpet in welcoming our president to the great kingdom.
Zoon Ahmed Khan, the Chinese president met with leaders of the Saudi royal family. He also met with the president of Egypt, the president of Iraq, as well as the president of the Palestinian Authority. In fact, a Chinese foreign ministry spokesman described this trip as, quote, epoch-making milestone in the history of China-Arab relations. How do you see this Chinese outreach to the region?
Thank you, Anand, for having me on the program. I think I'll begin with, continuing what Mr. Gao was talking about, how the historic significance of this trip cannot be overstated. Of course, let's go back historically when, if we think of the Belt and Road Initiative, it's inspired by the Silk Road. And we know that throughout history, there is millennia of cooperation, understanding between the Chinese civilization and the Islamic civilization. I think that is something which, when we talk about the Belt and Road Initiative today, we saw that back in 2013, 15, 16, in the initial years, a majority of countries on the BRI were Muslim countries. There has been a history, and there is obviously a promise of future cooperation and the mutually beneficial aspects of that cooperation moving forward. That said, I think one other aspect that makes this visit very significant is the direction in which Arab leadership is in general moving. For instance, these are countries that were seen by and large, unfortunately, as relatively very wealthy, but not focused on technology, more advancement, talent development, etc. But we see a major shift in many Arab countries in recent years to really think about diversifying their economies, to making technological advancements a priority, to also, even though, for example, Saudi Arabia is by far the biggest exporter of crude oil, and obviously the biggest recipient importer is China, but at the same time, the Saudis have also talked about renewables, diversifying energy as well. And another aspect, so obviously one point is that the region at large is moving in a direction that it's forward-looking, and they see China as a reliable and dynamic partner on that front, which has delivered within their country and otherwise. And obviously, lastly, I'd like to point out that multilateralism, you look at FOCAC, you look at China's cooperation with Central Asian countries, this kind of a setting, this kind of an arrangement, China and a grouping of countries in a region, has been a very successful format. So I think in that sense, Arab countries are united to think about what are the prospects that their collective priorities can open up when they think of partnering and having these frequent dialogues with China, taking their domestic demands, domestic priorities forward, and thinking of mutually beneficial and, most importantly, equal partnership on an equal footing.
Fadhel, great to have you with us. Welcome to the show. As Victor Gao pointed out a moment ago, this is a relationship that goes far beyond energy needs or anything like that. It's become a wide-ranging relationship, and a number of trade and economic agreements were signed that cover a wide range of industries, from electronics, the auto industry, other types of technology. Saudi Arabia has launched what it calls Vision 2030. So how does this relationship fit in with Saudi Arabia's goal to lessen its dependence on oil and diversify its economy?
Well, as a matter of fact, it's not just Saudi Arabia, but most of the Gulf countries have a Vision 2030, and all of these visions aim to diversify the economies away from oil and gas, and changing the composition of the economy to meet the needs of the Arab economies, the Gulf economies, to meet the aspirations of the youth. And to build more resilience. It's very important to understand the transformation that's happening, not just in the region, but the global transformation that's happened as a result of the three major crises that the world has faced: the 2008 financial crisis, the COVID crisis, and more recently, the energy and commodity crisis related to the Russia and Ukraine conflict. All of these have convinced the majority of the world, especially the US, China, Europe, everybody else that the form of globalization that we've pursued over the last 3 decades is unsustainable. And now we're transitioning to what looks like 3 major hubs of globalization. One controlled by the US and North America, repatriating strategic technologies and building sort of self-sufficiency, and not just in terms of food and energy, but also in terms of manufacturing capabilities. Western Europe is the second hub, and they're explicitly talking about technological sovereignty, food sovereignty, and energy sovereignty. And of course, the third hub will be in Asia, dominated by China. So it's very important for the rest of the world, especially for the Middle East and North Africa region and African continent as a whole, to think about where do you reposition yourself in this new geopolitical and economic map. Do you want to continue to be a satellite to a particular dominant set of countries, or do you want to reposition yourself as a strategic partner with the rest of the global economy? And it looks like these 3 hubs have very different views on how to interact with the rest of the global south, with the Middle East. And it looks like China has the most attractive approach from an Arab, from a Gulf state perspective, in terms of building a partnership as equal partners in terms of complementarities of strategies on a comprehensive set of issues, as opposed to hierarchical and single kind of focused strategy focused only on you give us energy, we give you security, and there's nothing else that happens there. Just as a point of comparison, in terms of, I'll be the third person here to highlight how historic this meeting is, this gathering is, in terms of its potential impact. Comparing the grandiose welcome and setup for this gathering, comparing it to Biden's visit to Saudi Arabia, what some people refer to as the fist bump meeting, that just speaks more than 1,000 words, as some people say, in terms of how much of a shift we're seeing in economic and geopolitical relations due to all of these transformations that are happening. So for Saudi Arabia and the Gulf states, Vision 2030 is very important for that new repositioning, very important for diversifying the economy away from oil. And China seems to be the right partner with the BRI initiative, Belt and Road Initiative, which revives an old historic trade route between the 2 regions, the Silk Road, essentially, in a modern, contemporary economic setting.
Abdel Bari-Atwan, how do you see the shifting relationships in the world right now? The traditional relationship between Saudi Arabia and the United States has been built on oil to a large extent, and then, of course, on mutual security as well, whereas in this burgeoning relationship we see with China, it's more about investment, about development, about building things. Where do you see it?
It is very clear that Saudi Arabia actually decided to turn its back to the West and to United States in particular, and to actually go to the East. 2,000 years ago, Prophet Muhammad of Islam said that you have to seek knowledge even if you have to go to China. Now China is coming to Saudi Arabia, and this is extremely important. People in the Middle East are really counting a lot on this turning point of Saudi Arabia, and seems most of the Arab countries are following suit in this direction. I think the Saudi, with the young Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, realized that there is a new international system is emerging economically, militarily, and also politically. So he wanted to be a part of this actually system, a new system, and turn his back again to the old system. It reminds me, this visit actually reminds me of the visit or the treaty which signed between President Roosevelt and King Abdulaziz, the founder of Saudi Arabia, in 1945, about about 50 years ago or 75 years ago or more. So now China is taking place of United States now, and I believe this will be a huge strategic cooperation, not between Saudi Arabia and China, but between the Arab world and China. The Arab world actually are really fed up of the American policies in the Middle East and the American wars in the Middle East. And China never been imperialistic country, never occupied any of the Arab world's countries. So I believe the cooperation will be ideal and it will be extremely fruitful. Now the trade balance between Saudi Arabia and China is 80 billion. I can see 80 a year. I can see this actually balance is double in few years' time. There is a full confidence in China, and now one of the fruits of this visit actually that Saudi Arabia will let its new generation to learn Chinese language. So it will be trade, it will be language, it will be culture, it will be military, it will be strategic also.
Victor, I'd like to get your views on what Fadhel Kaboub was telling us a moment ago, that the model of globalization that we've been seeing for the last 30 or 40 years is no longer sustainable. Now we are seeing these three hubs or centers of influence around the world, which are essentially competing with each other.
With due respect, I tend to disagree with this assessment. Why? I think the world we are living in remains a flat world, and connectivity is inevitable and is the momentum and the megatrend for the future. Now, there will be countries which want to fight against the megatrend and try to erect walls to surround themselves with. However, this will not be the next megatrend. Why? Because connectivity will further increase, exchanges between and among countries will be on the rise. And then once you know globalization, it is very difficult, if not impossible, to turn your back upon globalization, because the world is actually one single world, and you cannot artificially divide it up into my world versus your world, for example. That's not work. That's not going to work. That's not the megatrend we are faced with. Therefore, I think while I acknowledge that there are problems and defects in the current version of globalization, and all the countries need to pitch in to make further improvements. However, I think the world of tomorrow will be a more connected world, and mankind will communicate with each other, trade with each other, and share more ideas with each other with greater confidence in the years and decades to come, rather than shrinking back into their divided, fragmented worlds, if I may use that word.
Fadhel, what's your response to that?
I think we're in agreement. I didn't mean to say that we're going to revert back to pre-globalization kind of isolated economies and protected economies. I meant that there will be hubs of concentrated power and resilience, internal resilience, as a reaction to the excessive use of what was referred to as just-in-time supply chains. Now we're moving towards just-in-case supply chains, moving strategic industries and strategic production units closer to home, and that is primarily a reaction to the massive disruptions that the COVID supply chain disruptions caused and fueled inflation, and also the disruption related to the massive reliance on food and energy on the Russian and the Ukrainian economy for the vast majority of the African continent, for example. So we're not going to build walls, but we're going to build pockets of resilience and self-sufficiency that will continue to trade. For example, China's transition in the last 20 or 30 years that is really coming to fruition in the last couple of years officially, with the announcement of the dual circulation economy, whereby the Chinese economy not only will move away from the initial model, which is export-oriented primarily. Now China is going to grow its internal economy, its internal consumer base, its middle class. And as a result, it will create a completely different dynamic in terms of how it interacts with the rest of the world. So now China is going to move to higher value added manufacturing as opposed to low value added manufacturing and assembly line type of manufacturing. That means high-tech industries will emerge in China. And as a result, the partnership via the Belt and Road Initiative, via the partnerships with the Middle East and Arab countries, will become a partnership whereby China will use its dual-use circulation model to grow internally, but also grow internationally. So there will be no isolation. There will be partnerships. It's just it's going to be on different terms for different strategic goals.
Zoon Ahmed Khan, when we look at this growing relationship between China and Saudi Arabia, and Abdel Bari Atwan's observation a moment ago that the Middle East has largely turned its back on the West, particularly the United States, for a variety of reasons, the main ones being the wars that the United States has waged in the region. Have we got to a position now where it's a zero-sum game, that it's one side or the other?
Anand, I think the first thing we need to acknowledge and recognize is that nobody, maybe 10, 12, 15 years ago, could have imagined that elbow bump, meeting. It was so cold. It was so not in element of the relationship between the United States and Saudi Arabia that has been ongoing for decades. And I think that meeting in itself, and now we see the kind of welcome that President Xi is getting, the multilateral setting in which he is coming to the region, for a long-term partnership with countries that, as other panelists have mentioned, are moving towards a new positive dynamic direction. I think this is very telling of the world, of the changes that we have observed in the world. I do believe, the term multipolar world can be vague in certain senses, but the only countries, the only regions that are opposed to the idea of a multipolar world are the ones who are seen in relative decline. Do I think, so for instance, in Arab media, I think our Arab panelists will also maybe back this, that there's a lot of talk about China comes with the idea, opportunities towards a new multipolar world. And a multipolar world means more options, more opportunities, more positive competition. That said, I don't think we are moving towards a zero-sum situation. I think we are living in a world, like Victor Gao said, a flat world, a world where obviously currently certain countries and regions that seem to be, declining, see this new wave of dynamism, which is out of their control, as a threat. But I think they will in due time realize as well that this is an inevitable reality. China's rise, the economic engagement, interaction, and pragmatic priorities of other regions, Latin America, Africa, Middle East, other parts of Asia, are a reality. They cannot be reversed. This trend cannot be reversed. And I think now the real challenge for any presidency in the White House is that it better not be their tenure, their period during which China visibly, significantly overtakes. I think this is all. This is the only priority. It is an irreversible trend, and I think countries they will continue to partner with the United States, with China, with any other country, given their own domestic priorities. And as we move towards an increasingly multipolar situation, those options will increase and positive competition can ensue. So in that sense, I am an optimist.
Okay, Abdel Bari Atwan, we've seen so many instances where the United States and its foreign policy has been held hostage, really, to the four-year election cycle. When President Biden was campaigning before the 2020 election, he described Saudi Arabia as a pariah state. Then, of course, he had to go to Saudi Arabia, almost with cap in hand, to ask the Saudis to increase oil output to stabilize prices. That was after the Ukraine conflict broke out. I don't think his demands were met. So how would you characterize Saudi-US relations right now?
Well, I mean, it's a very cold relationship now. I believe, there is some sort of a feud between President Biden and the Crown Prince and the de facto rulers of Saudi Arabia, Prince Mohammed bin Salman. I believe the American will be extremely worried with this visit because now they already signed around 40 actually deals or agreements between Saudi Arabia and China, and I believe there will be more involvement, Chinese involvement in the Saudi Arabian economy. We know that Saudi Arabia is the wealthiest country in the Middle East, and it is the biggest oil exporter. And now, actually, United States and the West need Saudi Arabia because of the sanction against the Russian oil. The other point is, this kind of coordination on the energy sector between Saudi Arabia and Russia is alarming to United States. We see that oil plus agreement now is really a dominant relation between Saudi Arabia, the Gulf states, and Russia. So I think America entitled to be extremely worried. I believe Mohammed bin Salman will take revenge from President Biden because he neglected him, because he ignored him, because he marginalized him. So I think it is not a good time for the United States.
Victor Gao, during the Obama years in the White House, we saw his administration came up with the pivot to Asia, also referred to as rebalancing, moving United States military hardware from the Middle East into the Pacific, some say to counter China. Do you think that has something to do with the manner in which the Middle East now looks at the United States?
Well, first of all, let me clarify. The so-called pivot to Asia strategy by the United States is actually designed to bring instability, confrontation, and showdown to Asia. And this is really a matter of great concern because for many decades, peace and stability prevailed in our part of the world, and we really do not need to see another situation where war or conflict or showdown, confrontation will break out again in Asia. Now, talking about the Middle East, the United States has been there for many years, and war and conflict, rivalry, confrontation have taken place again and again and again, eventually plaguing almost the fundamental interest of everyone involved in the Middle East. This is a fact. And I think the United States is, in most cases, behind all these cases. For example, in the Iran-Iraq war in the 1980s, the United States supported Iraq against Iran, and then the United States launched one war against Iraq, a second war against Iraq, basically disrupting peace and stability and growth in that part of the world. I would say the countries in the Middle East, they know how precious it is to embrace peace and how war will be damaging for everyone's interest. And this is where China comes in. China itself is a force for peace and stability. China is a force for growth. This is really the magical thing that brings China and all the Arab countries together.
Okay, Victor. Okay, we are going to have to leave it there. Thank you to all of you for being with us. That is it for this edition of The Heat. I'm Anand Naidu in Washington, D.C.